She rushed to save a dying stranger, risking everything. She never knew that stranger was one of Belhaven's most powerful billionaires.
At 29 years old, Elena Carter had already learned that life could demand everything from a person and still ask for more. Every morning began before sunrise in a small apartment on the eastern edge of Belhaven, a crowded American city where luxury towers stood only a few miles away from neighborhoods where families counted every dollar. Elena lived in a modest second-floor apartment with her 6-year-old son, Noah, and although the place was small, she kept it spotless because she wanted her son to grow up believing that dignity had nothing to do with money. Her husband had disappeared from their lives 3 years earlier after leaving behind unpaid bills, broken promises, and a silence that Elena eventually stopped trying to understand. Since then, she had worked every hour she could find. During the day, she worked as a cashier at the prestigious Whitmore Grand department store, and several evenings a week she cleaned offices downtown after closing time. She was exhausted almost every day, but she rarely allowed Noah to see it. That morning, she stood in the kitchen preparing a simple breakfast while Noah struggled to zip his red backpack. "Mom, can we have pancakes this weekend?" he asked hopefully. Elena smiled and kissed his forehead. "If Mommy gets paid on Friday, you can have the biggest pancakes in Belhaven." Noah laughed, and for a moment the unpaid electricity notice sitting beneath a magnet on the refrigerator disappeared from her mind. She walked him to school before catching the bus toward downtown. The Whitmore Grand was famous for elegance, wealthy customers, expensive merchandise, and strict rules. Employees were expected to smile constantly, remain at their assigned stations, and never create inconvenience for management. Elena had never questioned those rules. She needed the job too badly. She had learned to tolerate rude customers, skipped lunches, aching feet, and supervisors who rarely noticed her unless something went wrong. Yet Elena believed in doing her job properly. She greeted elderly shoppers warmly, helped confused customers find departments, and sometimes quietly paid for small necessities when she noticed a struggling customer counting coins. Nobody called her extraordinary. To the company, she was simply another employee wearing a burgundy uniform. Elena did not know that before the sun went down, that uniform would become the symbol of the most important decision she had ever made. The afternoon crowd was unusually heavy because a major charity event was taking place nearby. Elena had been standing behind the customer service register for almost 4 hours when she heard a sudden scream outside the main entrance. At first she assumed someone had dropped a package, but then another scream followed, louder than the first. Customers rushed toward the glass doors. Elena looked up and saw people gathering around the marble fountain in front of the store. An elderly man had collapsed on the pavement. His body was completely still. Several shoppers pulled out their phones. Others stood frozen, afraid to touch him. Elena immediately recognized the signs of a medical emergency. She remembered first aid training she had completed at a community center years earlier. Without waiting for permission, she stepped away from her register and ran outside. "Call emergency services," she shouted. Nobody moved quickly enough, so Elena pointed toward a young man holding his phone. "You, please call now." She dropped to her knees beside the elderly stranger. His breathing was shallow. His skin looked frighteningly pale. She carefully checked his pulse and positioned his head while speaking calmly to him. "Sir, stay with me. Help is coming." The man's eyelids opened slightly. His blue eyes struggled to focus on her face. "Don't close your eyes," Elena whispered. "Just keep breathing." A security guard finally arrived, but instead of helping, he looked anxiously toward the store entrance. "Ma'am, you need to return to your station," he said. Elena stared at him in disbelief. "This man needs help." She continued assisting the stranger while someone finally called an ambulance. Seconds felt like minutes. The elderly man suddenly gasped and gripped Elena's sleeve with surprising strength. His fingers trembled against the burgundy fabric. "You're safe," Elena told him. "I'm not leaving you." In the distance, sirens began to grow louder. When paramedics rushed through the crowd, they immediately took over. One of them looked at Elena and said, "You did the right thing." Those few minutes mattered. Elena watched the ambulance doors close around the stranger. She felt relief rather than pride. She had no idea that the man she had just saved was one of the most powerful people in Belhaven. Elena returned to the department store expecting perhaps a warning. Instead, she found Victor Lang waiting beside her register with his arms folded across his chest. His expression was colder than she had ever seen it. "Where were you?" he asked. Elena looked toward the entrance. "There was a medical emergency. I couldn't just stand there." Victor's jaw tightened. "You abandoned your station during peak customer hours." Elena tried to explain that the men might have died without immediate assistance, but Victor interrupted her. "We have policies for emergencies. Employees do not decide when policies apply." Several customers were still watching. Elena lowered her voice. "I was trying to save his life." Victor responded without emotion. "And now you've created a staffing problem." He instructed Maya Brooks to cover the register while Elena followed him into a small office. A white envelope was already sitting on the desk. Elena stared at it. "What's that?" Victor pushed it toward her. "Your termination notice." For several seconds, she could not breathe. "You're firing me?" Victor nodded. "Effective immediately." Elena looked at him as if he had spoken another language. "I've worked here for 3 years. I've never been late. I've never received a formal warning." Victor simply replied, "You violated company policy." Elena's hands began trembling. She thought about Noah. She thought about rent. She thought about the electricity notice on the refrigerator. "Please," she whispered. "I need this job." Victor did not soften. "You should have thought about that before leaving your register." Elena signed the paperwork because there was nothing else she could do. She packed her belongings into a cardboard box. Inside were a family photograph, a cheap coffee mug decorated by Noah, and a small framed drawing her son had made at school. When she walked through the store's glass doors for the final time, she looked back at the polished interior where she had spent thousands of hours working. Nobody stopped her. Nobody thanked her. Outside, the same fountain stood quietly where she had saved a stranger's life. Elena sat at the bus stop with the cardboard box on her lap and finally allowed herself to cry. That evening, Elena returned home before Noah. She placed the cardboard box beneath the kitchen table and tried to make dinner as though nothing had happened. When Noah entered, he immediately noticed her face. "Mom, are you sick?" Elena forced a smile. "Just tired." She made soup, helped him with homework, and listened while he described a drawing competition at school. She did not tell him she had lost her job. She wanted him to sleep peacefully. Across town, in Belhaven Medical Center, the man Elena had rescued finally opened his eyes. His name was Arthur Whitmore. He was 72 years old and had spent 4 decades building Whitmore Industries from a small construction company into a multinational corporation. Doctors told him that immediate assistance had likely prevented a catastrophic outcome. Arthur listened quietly. Then he asked, "Who helped me?" His nurse described a young woman wearing a burgundy store uniform who had stayed beside him until paramedics arrived. Arthur closed his eyes and remembered her voice. She had told him not to give up. He wanted to meet her. That same evening, Arthur's son, Daniel Whitmore, arrived at the hospital. Daniel was 36, wealthy, disciplined, and known throughout Belhaven as an intimidating businessman who could negotiate million-dollar contracts without blinking. But when he saw his father lying in a hospital bed, his confidence disappeared. "Dad, what happened?" Arthur told him everything he remembered. He described the woman who had knelt beside him while everyone else watched. Daniel immediately asked his assistant to identify her. Within hours, security footage from the department store was obtained. Daniel watched the recording alone. He saw his father collapse. He saw dozens of people hesitate. Then he saw Elena run. He watched her kneel beside Arthur while employees stood behind the glass doors. Then he watched her return to the store and leave later carrying a cardboard box. Daniel looked at his assistant. Why was she carrying that? The assistant hesitated. She was fired shortly afterward. Daniel stared at the screen. For what? The answer made his expression change completely. For leaving her register to help your father. The next morning, Elena began searching for another job. She updated her resume, printed copies at a public library, and walked through several downtown buildings asking for work. She applied for reception positions, cashier jobs, hotel cleaning work, and administrative assistant roles. Some employers wanted full availability. Others wanted experience she did not have. One manager told her that being a single mother made scheduling difficult. Another promised to call and never did. By afternoon, Elena's feet hurt and the summer heat had soaked through her blouse beneath the jacket she had borrowed for interviews. She sat on a bench outside a small cafe and opened her phone. There was one message from her landlord reminding her that rent was due in 12 days. Elena closed her eyes. For the first time, fear became stronger than exhaustion. She wondered whether she had made a terrible mistake by helping a stranger. Maybe she should have stayed behind the register. Maybe the company had been right. Maybe kindness was a luxury people like her could not afford. Then she remembered the elderly man's hand gripping her sleeve. She remembered his frightened eyes. She remembered telling him that help was coming. Elena shook her head. She could regret losing her job, but she could never regret saving a life. At that exact moment, a black luxury sedan stopped beside the curb. Elena barely noticed until the rear door opened. Daniel Whitmore stepped onto the sidewalk. His appearance was completely different from the people Elena had met during her job search. He looked like someone accustomed to rooms where decisions affected thousands of people. He approached her calmly. "Miss Carter." Elena looked up cautiously. "Yes." Daniel extended his hand. "My name is Daniel Whitmore." Elena froze. The surname meant something. Everyone in Belhaven knew Whitmore Industries. Daniel's next words made her heart stop. "The man you saved yesterday is my father." Elena stood slowly, unsure whether to accept Daniel's hand. "Is he all right?" she asked. Daniel nodded. "He's recovering because you helped him." Elena looked down. "I only did what anyone should have done." Daniel smiled faintly. "That's exactly what my father said you would say." Elena expected him to offer money, and she immediately prepared to refuse. Daniel seemed to notice. "I'm not here to buy your kindness," he said. "I'm here because my family owes you a debt we cannot measure." Elena shook her head. "Your father doesn't owe me anything." Daniel replied, "Then at least let him thank you himself." Elena hesitated. She had Noah with her after school, and she was uncomfortable entering the world of billionaires. Still, she agreed to visit the hospital. That afternoon, she brought Noah with her. Arthur was sitting upright when they entered his room. The moment he saw Elena, emotion filled his eyes. He reached for her hand. "You came." Elena smiled gently. "Of course." Arthur looked at Noah and asked his name. When the boy answered, Arthur smiled. "Your mother is very brave." Noah looked at Elena proudly. "She helps everybody." Arthur's eyes became wet. He told Elena that he remembered her voice when everything around him had gone dark. "You gave me another chance," he said. Elena answered, "I didn't do anything special." Arthur looked at her firmly. "You did something most people would not." Daniel watched the conversation quietly. He had spent years surrounded by executives who calculated every decision according to profit. Elena had calculated nothing. She had simply acted. Before Elena left, Arthur asked Daniel to investigate the circumstances surrounding her termination. "If she was punished for saving me," he said, "I want to know what kind of company believes that is acceptable." Daniel promised he would find out. Daniel's investigation uncovered far more than one unfair termination. Whitmore Grand's management had been hiding employee complaints for years. Workers had reported unsafe conditions, denied emergency breaks, unpaid overtime, and pressure from supervisors to ignore customer incidents. Victor Lang had repeatedly disciplined employees for leaving their stations, even during medical emergencies. The company had protected him because his department consistently met sales targets. Daniel read report after report in his office. His anger grew with every page. Then he watched another piece of security footage. It showed an elderly woman falling near an escalator several months earlier. An employee had tried to help her and was ordered back to work. Daniel closed the laptop. "How long has this been happening?" his legal advisor asked. Daniel answered, "Too long." Meanwhile, news of Elena's dismissal began spreading online. A shopper had uploaded footage from the day Arthur collapsed. The video showed Elena rushing forward while other people stood frozen. Within 24 hours, thousands of viewers were asking the same question: why was the woman who saved a life fired? Local journalists contacted the department store. Management initially claimed Elena had violated safety procedures, but the explanation only made the backlash worse. Customers began posting their own experiences. Former employees came forward. Investors demanded answers. Victor Lang was suddenly unable to control the story. The same company that had ignored Elena's desperation now faced a public relations crisis. Elena herself remained unaware of how quickly everything was changing. She was too busy trying to protect Noah from the consequences of losing her income. That evening, she sat at the kitchen table calculating numbers on a piece of paper. Rent. Groceries. School expenses. Electricity. Transportation. The total was impossible. She quietly wiped away a tear before Noah noticed. But someone was watching the story from a very different position. Daniel Whitmore had made a decision. He would not simply give Elena a check. He wanted to offer her something that could change the future. 2 days later, Daniel returned to Elena's apartment building. He carried no envelope of money and brought no team of lawyers. He simply stood outside her door and asked for a conversation. Elena invited him inside. The apartment was small, but clean. Noah's drawings covered one wall. Daniel looked around and realized something important. Elena did not need charity. She needed opportunity. "I want to offer you a position," Daniel said. Elena looked surprised. "At Whitmore Industries?" "Not exactly," Daniel replied. "My family operates a community foundation. It funds employment programs, emergency assistance, child care services, and training for families struggling financially." Elena remained silent. Daniel continued. "I want you to lead a new community initiative." Elena almost laughed because the idea seemed impossible. "I don't have a college degree." Daniel nodded. "I know. I've never managed a foundation." "I know. Then why me?" Daniel leaned forward. "Because you've already demonstrated the one quality we cannot teach." Elena stared at him. "Which is?" Daniel answered, "You help people when nobody is watching." The words affected her deeply. Still, she was afraid. She had never worked in an office like that. She worried she would fail. Daniel told her she would receive professional training and support. The position offered stable pay, health coverage, flexible hours, and educational assistance for Noah. Elena asked the question that mattered most. "Would I be expected to pretend I'm someone I'm not?" Daniel smiled. "No. That's exactly why I want you there." Elena accepted the offer that evening. For the first time since her husband's departure, she felt something she had almost forgotten: possibility. Elena's first weeks at the foundation were difficult. She had to learn budgets, schedules, grant applications, employee management, and community partnerships. She made mistakes. She asked questions. She stayed late studying documents she had never seen before. Daniel never mocked her lack of experience. Instead, he told his executives that talent did not always arrive with a university diploma. Elena began visiting neighborhoods where struggling parents needed help. She listened to mothers who had lost jobs because they could not afford childcare. She met fathers trying to retrain after workplace injuries. She spoke with young adults who had abandoned education because their families needed immediate income. Instead of designing programs from a boardroom, she asked people what they actually needed. Her first major proposal created flexible job training sessions with childcare available on-site. Her second created emergency transportation assistance for parents attending interviews. Her third connected local businesses with families searching for stable employment. Within months, applications multiplied. People began telling Elena that the foundation had become the first place where they felt heard instead of judged. Daniel watched from a distance. He had expected Elena to become competent. He had not expected her to become extraordinary. Arthur, meanwhile, recovered steadily and began visiting the foundation whenever his health allowed. He often joked that his best business investment had been collapsing beside a fountain. Elena would laugh and tell him not to make jokes about frightening everyone. Arthur would answer, if I had to frighten them to find you, perhaps it was worth it. Their friendship became genuine and unexpected. Noah also began visiting the foundation after school. He would sit quietly in a corner drawing pictures while his mother worked. Employees adored him. He eventually drew a picture of Elena helping a crowd of people cross a bridge. When she asked what it meant, Noah smiled. You're helping people get to the other side. While Elena's life was changing, Victor Lang's world was collapsing. The investigation into Whitmore Grand eventually became public. Internal records showed that management had ignored repeated employee complaints. Victor's decisions were examined by corporate leadership, and several executives who had defended him were forced to resign. The store issued a public apology to Elena. Victor personally requested a meeting. Elena agreed, but not because she wanted revenge. She simply wanted him to understand what his decision had cost. Victor looked older when they met. I was wrong, he admitted. Elena remained silent. I thought protecting the company meant enforcing every rule, he continued. I forgot that companies are supposed to serve people. Elena finally answered, you didn't just fire me. You made me believe I had done something wrong by helping someone. Victor lowered his eyes. I'm sorry. Elena accepted the apology, but she did not return to the store. She told him that forgiveness did not mean pretending nothing happened. The company eventually changed its emergency response policies, introduced mandatory first aid training, and created protections for employees who assisted customers during medical emergencies. Several former employees were rehired. The store also established a worker assistance fund. Elena did not celebrate Victor's downfall. She believed punishment alone would not repair the damage. What mattered was whether people learned from it. Daniel later asked her why she had not demanded more. Elena answered, because I don't want my life to be built around what they did to me. Daniel smiled. Then what do you want it built around? Elena looked toward a room filled with parents attending a training program. What we can do for people who still need help. As Elena's work expanded, she noticed a change in Noah. He was no longer asking whether they would have enough money for groceries. He was asking what his mother was doing at the foundation. He began telling his classmates that his mother helped parents find jobs. One afternoon, Elena arrived home to find Noah sitting at the kitchen table with a small cardboard box. Inside were his old school drawings and the coffee mug he had once painted for her. Mom, he said, I saved these because I thought we might move. Elena sat beside him. She realized he had remembered the night she lost her job. Were you scared? She asked. Noah nodded. I thought maybe we wouldn't have a home. Elena hugged him tightly. I'm sorry you were scared. Noah looked at her. But we're okay now. Elena smiled through tears. Their apartment had not changed dramatically. They still lived simply. But the fear had disappeared. Elena began saving money for Noah's education. She enrolled him in a better after-school program and made sure he never believed that poverty was something to be ashamed of. One evening, Daniel visited their home for dinner with Arthur. It was the first time Elena had invited them into her personal world. Arthur looked at the small kitchen and laughed warmly. This is much more comfortable than my mansion. Elena smiled. You don't have to be polite. Arthur answered, I'm not. The dinner was simple. Noah told jokes. Daniel laughed more that evening than Elena had ever seen him laugh. Arthur watched them all and quietly said, money can buy a beautiful house. It cannot buy a beautiful evening. Elena realized that the people who had entered her life because of one terrible day had somehow become part of a new family she had never expected. One winter, a major factory closed outside Belhaven, leaving hundreds of families without income. The foundation received more requests for assistance in 1 month than it had handled during the previous year. Some executives recommended reducing the number of applicants because the budget was limited. Elena refused. If we reduce the people we help because the problem is bigger than expected, then we're not solving the problem. Daniel supported her, but even he knew the foundation could not fund everything. Elena proposed a partnership with local companies. Businesses would provide paid apprenticeships, while the foundation would cover short-term transportation and childcare. The plan required weeks of negotiation. Elena worked until midnight many times. She spoke to business owners, parents, school administrators, and city officials. Eventually, the program launched. Hundreds of people received interviews. Dozens secured jobs within the first month. More followed. The foundation became a model for other organizations. Reporters began asking Elena why she had chosen this career. She always gave the same answer. Because I know what it feels like to have one unexpected problem threaten your entire life. When asked about the day she saved Arthur, she said, "I wasn't thinking about my future. I was thinking about his." That answer became one of the most quoted statements from her interviews. Arthur listened to one broadcast from his home and smiled. Daniel asked him why. Arthur answered, "She still doesn't understand how extraordinary she is." Daniel looked toward the television. Maybe that's why she is. Nearly a year after the fountain incident, Arthur invited Elena to a private ceremony at Whitmore Hall. Elena assumed it was another foundation event. Instead, she walked into a room filled with employees, community leaders, former workers, and families whose lives had been changed by the program she created. Daniel stood at the center of the room. Arthur sat beside him. A large screen displayed photographs of people who had found jobs, reunited with their families, or completed educational programs through the foundation. Elena became emotional. Daniel stepped forward. A year ago, a woman lost her job because she chose to help a stranger. He paused. Today, that same woman has helped thousands of strangers. Everyone applauded. Arthur then stood with assistants and walked toward Elena. He handed her a small wooden box. Inside was the antique gold watch he had worn on the day he collapsed. Elena immediately shook her head. "I can't accept this." Arthur smiled. "You are not accepting payment for saving me." He closed her fingers around the box. "You are accepting a reminder." Elena looked at him. "A reminder of what?" Arthur answered, "That time is precious, and kindness gives meaning to the time we are given." Elena cried openly. Noah stood beside her, holding her hand. Daniel watched them with pride. The room applauded again, but Elena was not thinking about applause. She was remembering the cardboard box she had carried out of the department store 1 year earlier. At the time, she had believed she was carrying the remains of her old life. She had not realized she was carrying the beginning of a new one. Years later, the Foundation's community programs were operating in several cities. Elena remained involved personally. She never became obsessed with wealth or status. She continued wearing simple clothes, continued listening to people, and continued telling Noah that success meant being useful to others. Noah eventually grew into a confident young man who volunteered at the foundation during school breaks. Arthur lived long enough to see the program expand beyond Belhaven. He often told people that the day Elena saved him was the day he discovered how badly his own company had forgotten the human beings behind its numbers. Daniel became more open with employees and transformed several corporate policies. He later admitted that Elena had changed the way he viewed leadership. "I used to think leadership meant making people follow you," he said. "Now I think it means making people believe they can move forward." Elena never forgot Victor's termination letter. She kept a copy inside a drawer, not because she wanted to remember the pain, but because she wanted to remember how quickly life could change. Whenever someone at the foundation felt hopeless, she would tell them, "The worst chapter of your life does not get to decide the ending." That sentence became the foundation's unofficial motto. Thousands of people heard it. Thousands carried it into new jobs, new homes, and new beginnings. Elena had once believed that losing her job was the greatest disaster that could happen to her. Eventually she understood that it had been the painful doorway through which her purpose entered. One evening, years after the day at the fountain, Elena stood outside the foundation's newest community center as the sun disappeared behind Belhaven's skyline. Children were running across the courtyard while parents walked through the doors carrying folders filled with job applications and training schedules. Noah, now older and taller, stood beside her. He looked at the building and then at his mother. "Do you ever think about that day?" he asked. Elena smiled. "Every day." "Do you wish you had stayed at your register?" Elena looked at him for a moment before shaking her head. "Never." She remembered the crowd. The ambulance. The termination letter. The cardboard box. The fear. Then she looked at the people whose lives had changed because she had refused to walk away from one stranger. Sometimes, she told Noah, you do the right thing and immediately pay a price for it. That doesn't mean it was the wrong thing. Noah smiled. Then why did everything work out? Elena looked toward the setting sun. Because kindness doesn't always return in the same form. She explained that sometimes it comes back as an opportunity. Sometimes as a friendship. Sometimes as a second chance. And sometimes it returns through people you helped when they had nowhere else to turn. Arthur had once been a stranger lying helpless beside a fountain. Daniel had once been a millionaire who knew Elena only from security footage. Victor had once been the manager who believed a company rule mattered more than a human life. None of them could have known where that single afternoon would lead. Elena lost her job that day, but she found her purpose. She lost financial security, but she gained a mission. She walked away from a company that saw her as replaceable and entered a world where her compassion became her greatest strength. Her story did not prove that every good deed produces an immediate reward. It proved something more important: doing the right thing can change the person you become, even when you cannot control what happens next. The ambulance had disappeared down the street that afternoon, carrying away a man Elena thought she would never see again. But the story had only just begun. One frightened stranger had reached for her sleeve. One exhausted mother had refused to let go. And from that moment came thousands of second chances. So if you ever find yourself standing between what is easy and what is right, remember Elena Carter. Remember that sometimes the smallest act of courage can become the beginning of an extraordinary life. And remember that kindness does not always knock on your door immediately. Sometimes it travels quietly through other people's lives until, years later, it finds its way back to you. If this story touched your heart, take a moment to like this video, share it with someone who needs hope today, leave a comment telling us what you would have done in Elena's place, and subscribe to Silent Empire for more dramatic stories of courage, justice, second chances, and unexpected transformations.